The lawsuit is a lawsuit of a very particular nature, the likes of which you've never heard of before. If you're new to the anti-tax movement, if you're new to the anti-IRS effort, understand that I am not part of the anti-tax movement, the patriot movement. I am a whistleblower. All of my arguments are statutory. I don't have a single theory in the world. The anti-tax movement has the theory. The entire anti-tax movement is based on a presumption that enforcement is legitimate, and so they figure out a bunch of excuses why the government can do what it's doing. I must have used the zip code. I must have got a social security number. I must have signed a contract somewhere. I must have assessed myself. I must have this. Those are all presumptions that something happened in the past that made you liable. That'll never be the case. The law will either impose the taxes or fail to impose the taxes. It's one or the other, and so sorry that requires you learn the law. In 1988, the I.R.S. made me angry, and in the beginning of 1994, I started to formulate the final draft of my treatise on the differences between the tax code and the I.R.S. that I discovered in those 5.5 years. And that treatise, those conclusions, are what Chris and I have used many times since 2006 to prevent indictment. Chris himself, in January of 2007, appeared before a tax grand jury and argued the way I told him to argue, and never heard from them again. And since that time, he learned what I do, to do the same thing for others, and we've teamed up to help people join a process that I put in place January of 2006 with a complaint to 80 members of Congress. And it's a process that is sitting there waiting for you to join it if in fact you think the law is being violated in the ways I've described. And somebody in South Carolina has a terrible attitude and wants to file a lawsuit just like the one that was filed May 20th of 2015. In August of 2015, the government filed a motion to dismiss. The plaintiff filed an opposition, and the government filed a rebuttal to the opposition September 14th. And since then, there's not been one bit of movement in that case. We're still waiting for the court to write a memorandum as to why the lawsuit will not move forward and it's dismissed, or a memorandum saying why the lawsuit will be allowed to move forward. It's one or the other, and we're waiting. While we wait, another gentleman, South Carolina, says, you know, I want to file one of those lawsuits as the lead plaintiff. And so we're trying to drum up a few other interested parties to be original plaintiffs to file along with him in this lawsuit, so that it'll be this gentleman and 3 or 4 other people as the plaintiffs versus the United States as the defendant, and we want answers. You've deprived us of the provisions of Tax Code Section 83. You can't even interpret Section 83. You don't train on it. No one will talk about it, and yet the courts and the I.R.S. and tax courts say it explains how to tax all compensation. This is unacceptable. That's just one of the issues raised under the Administrative Procedures Act, asking the court to declare that all property is cost under Section 83, and asking the court to declare that that regulation under Section 1 that says citizens of the United States owe this tax deviates from Section 1 of the Code, which does not even mention anybody's citizenship. If the statute doesn't do the work, the regulation can't do the work. So there's a few very specific contentions made in this complaint, and there's going to be another one filed on the East Coast instead of in South Dakota to see if, if we, so far there's no answer. It's been 4.5 months, almost 5 months since the court got the final pleading in that exchange trying to dismiss the lawsuit without a word. 5 months, that's long enough for me. Let's file another lawsuit. They don't get it. So another one's going to be filed, and if you're interested, after you're convinced that the law is being violated, then you have an opportunity to join this lawsuit. If you're somebody that already has my materials and you think that the law is being violated in particular ways, you may want to join the criminal complaint that I filed in Congress in '06. It's 10 years old now, saying that I've been deprived of Section 83, and in the first place, if you hadn't mentioned citizens of the United States in Regulation 26 CFR 1.1-1, Americans wouldn't even be subject to the tax code to start with. And so you're committing extortion and racketeering in a conspiracy against my rights. These are all crimes, and I'm here to report to Congress that I want to join that criminal complaint as a similarly situated witness to crime. Now you're a co-complainant to Congress. With that affidavit of joinder that you would file to become a co-complainant in Congress, we attach that to your affidavit of joinder under Rule 20 to this lawsuit that will be filed, and now you're on record with your claim, your affirmation, that you don't believe for 1 minute the tax code imposes a tax on the value of labor or on capital gains if you're an American. As such a claimant, you're basically on record under penalties of perjury saying that you don't believe you have a legal duty. Case law, plenty of cases, including Supreme Court cases, U.S. versus John Cheek, says that if you don't believe you have a legal duty, you are not guilty of willful tax evasion or willful failure to file if in the future you fail to file or fail to pay. That's what we're trying to accomplish. Everyone on the lawsuit, just as everyone on the lawsuit that was already filed last May, will have earned the right to say that I've even sued the United States government for proof the tax code applies to Americans, and they can't debate me on 3 or 4 statutes. Another thing the lawsuit asks the court is to declare that since I'm on file with Congress and now with this court with a sworn statement saying I don't believe I have a duty, I want the court to declare that I'm not willful if in the future I fail to file or fail to pay, because it's willful tax evasion or willful failure to file. If you're not willful, you're not guilty. And so if you can prove that you don't believe you have a legal duty, you've proven that you're not willful. Willfulness is a 3-pronged test: having a legal duty, knowing and believing you have the duty, and failing to perform the duty. I can prove no legal duty is imposed by the tax code. I'm the only one that can do it. And a bunch of other people have proven they don't believe they have a duty. Bernice Kuglin, Lloyd Long, John Cheek, and a couple of others. But none of them understood the way the taxes are imposed. None of them understood the differences between the tax code and the I.R.S. That's my specialty. I analyzed the differences between the tax code and the I.R.S., and I found a bunch of differences. And some of the differences are all telling. They are conclusive and enormously destructive to what the I.R.S. claims is its authority. Citizens of the United States are only named in regulation. The 16th Amendment says only Congress can lay and collect this tax. You can't do it with a regulation. There goes the whole tax code under just that one argument. So if you can learn 2 arguments, those are the 2 main issues. They pull the rug out from underneath the I.R.S. Just 2 issues. And these 2 arguments are in the box the I.R.S. says we have to say when we argue tax law. I did it the hard way. And I found certain differences between the tax code and the I.R.S. that the government runs from. And they run in the direction of shutting down a criminal investigation at the I.R.S. level, abandoning grand jury proceedings at the district court level. There are 2 arguments they can't talk about. I'm only named in a regulation. I'm obviously not subject to, and never have been subject to, Social Security chapters, and that leaves just Chapter 1. I'm only named in a regulation in Chapter 1. What were you thinking? And secondly, how did Section 83 operate in your conclusion I owe tax on my compensation? We're done. Wasn't that easy? Get the material, they're dynamite. There's a very particular way that it functions, it operates. There's an internal structure to the tax code that operates a very particular way. I was done with this in the first quarter of 1994. I was formulating and briefing all of my conclusions. I put them on record with 80 members of Congress, January of '06. 1 year later, Chris went to a grand jury with him and never heard from the grand jury again. And since then, more than a dozen people have benefited this way. On the call right now is L.T. Oates, South Carolina. He was in the middle of a criminal investigation by the I.R.S. He joined a complaint in Congress, hasn't heard from him since. It's been like a couple of years. So it can be done. And that's what we're suing over in this, a second lawsuit. It might not be good enough that you're on record with Congress. It's nice to see somebody that might otherwise be indicted be able to tell the I.R.S. and the DOJ, listen, I sued you for proof it applies to me, and you can't even debate me. Why are we here? Why are you bothering me? And if in front of a trial jury, you're able to say, I'm on trial for tax evasion. I'm on trial for failure to file tax returns. I sued these people, and they can't even debate me on a simple 3, 4, 5 statutes. Why are we here? That's the person you turn into as a plaintiff on one of these lawsuits. You can look the jury straight in the eye going, I even sued them. And they'd rather have me in prison than prove I owe any money at all. That's a belligerent defendant that they don't want in court, because we know, everybody knows, when the government loses a tax criminal case, everybody laughs them right out of the room. They get the transcripts of the trial, and they email the transcripts all over the country, so everybody knows what went down, how this person got an acquittal, okay? Which I don't really feel is a victory. Let me describe the anti-tax movement out there calls that a victory. In that victory, a person was indicted, it went in the newspaper, it went on the web, they got arrested, maybe got held pending trial, wearing orange jumpsuits and handcuffs and belly chains every time they were taken to court, along with leg manacles. They might be released pending trial and have to wear an ankle bracelet. Their reputation's destroyed, their assets are seized, their house or apartment is raided, and then they go to, they're strapped, they're saddled with a totally incompetent public defender that knows nothing about the tax code, certainly nothing about tax code section 83, and they go to trial, and their future is in the hands of a bunch of strangers they've never even seen before, that are serving on that jury, that are getting lied to by the prosecution and the court, and then they're acquitted. That's not a victory. That's a close damn call. They came this close to going to prison for years. That's not a victory. A victory is when the government says, well, shut down the criminal investigation. This one doesn't believe they have a duty. They got arguments that we can't even talk about. At the same time, the courts and the I.R.S. and tax court say Section 83 explains how to tax all compensation. They're keen to the arguments that have been on record with Congress for 10 years we can't even talk about. They're keen on the arguments that we got sued over in South Dakota last May in 2015, and it's a disaster there. We can't even debate them on 4 or 5 statutes. Shut down the investigation. Tell the grand jury we're going on to a different case. That's a victory. All the rest are close calls. And no one else in the country, no one else in the known universes can claim this level of success. Nobody has achieved this level of success, period. Chris and I do it out of one office, 2 guys. The analysis of the tax code was just me with nobody's help. And in 1992, when I saw all these frivolous filing penalties raining down on everybody that filed 1040 NRs, I turned off the movement. I turned away from the anti-tax movement and never looked back, dug into the law instead, and came out 2 years later with my treatise. And so this is unique to me. Nobody else has bothered to learn what I teach. They're all busy singing a sui juris over the rainbow song, and their people go to prison, or they get trashed, and they never come up with any answers. They have no affirmative claims. They have a bunch of specious. Do you know what a shibboleth is? Shibboleth. I'm going to read the definition to you. Shibboleth, a custom, principle, or belief distinguishing a particular class or group of people, especially a long-standing one regarded as outmoded or no longer important. Shibboleth. That's the anti-tax movement. And when you're ready to graduate, tell me. Buy the material, the manual on Tax Code Section 83, Codebreaker, the Section 83 equation, a manual I wrote in 1994, and in March of 2014, I added 30 pages to it, published it, and it'll tell you everything you need to know about Section 83 and nothing that you don't need to know. So anyway, we're suing over this. In bold print, we're right in the government's face, saying we want the regulation under Section 1 declared null and void because it deviates from statute when the regulation identifies a citizen that owes the tax and the statute does not. But the second cause of action is about Section 83. The third cause of action, I don't discuss this very much, but assessment authority for the I.R.S. is under Section 6201A. And 6201A says they can assess all taxes which have not been duly paid by stamp at the time and in the manner provided by law. Stamp taxes are paid by foreign insurers and casinos in the 4300s and 4400s of the code. That's not me. They wrote a regulation that says all taxes imposed by the 1954 code and didn't even mention the term stamp. So I've challenged that regulation as an agency action that violates the spirit of the law. It's unconstitutional, and it was done without accordance to the law, which is an element of review you're entitled to under the Administrative Procedures Act. Fourth cause of action. I'm not the person in the definition of person in Chapter 75 of the tax code on crimes, because I'm not an officer or employee of a corporation or member or employee of a partnership. And those are the only people named in the definition of person. Fifth cause of action. This is one of the plaintiffs. In particular, his bank account was raided without a notice of deficiency having been issued first. And so we'll pass on that one. Sixth cause of action. If I say that I don't owe a tax, they call me a sovereign citizen, which means I'm ready to go up on the rooftop with a rifle and take some people out, and I'm going to file a false security with the government for billions of dollars and go out and buy a car with it and all this other good stuff, which is what the sovereign citizen movement teaches you can do. And I'm going to threaten public servants when all I am is a whistleblower. My arguments are statutory. And so I want the court to declare that it's not right to call me a sovereign citizen. Seventh cause of action, void for vagueness. They won't even tell me how to comply with the law, Section 83, and yet they threaten me and tax me. You can't do that without violating the void for vagueness doctrine. And the eighth cause of action, willfulness. I've got statutory arguments they can't refute, and so I shouldn't be deemed to believe I have a legal duty. I want the court to declare that someone in my situation who's built the public record I've built regarding my beliefs should not be considered willful if in the future I fail to file or fail to pay. And I just went through the 8 causes of action. I'm looking at the lawsuit filed last May. Then there's a section called history. Here's where all these things have been. And then after the lawsuit, there's 300 plus pages of evidence that was filed with the lawsuit, including the 180 pages filed with Congress in '06 and the jointers that the several original plaintiffs had filed with 80 members of Congress. And so we're on record. We have a lawsuit. The plaintiffs are suing. We're on the offense, and the government can't do anything but run by saying everything in the world is frivolous because it contradicts what the I.R.S. says. And all we're pointing out, excuse me, if we're wrong, you can interpret these statutes in a way that proves our interpretation is invalid. We don't have a theory. We have an interpretation of existing statutes. And if we're wrong, you can prove it by telling us what the correct interpretation of the statute is. You're public servants. Your authority is derived from statute. You're in the game of interpreting statutes 24/7, 365. What's your interpretation if we're wrong? They can't. That's a confirmed kill. So that's what the lawsuit is going to be about. And thanks everybody for joining us today.